It's kind of nice outside today. Kind of enjoying the overcast and a little bit of sprinklings happening, so nice spot to read a book. Janitor's boy, Andrew Clements, left off yesterday. We found out why Jack was so mad. Now we're going to continue. Left off on chapter 3. Now we're going to chapter 4. The sweet smell of victory. Sitting in English class with his heart pounding away, Jack reviewed the mission. Just 5 minutes ago, he delivered a crushing blow to the enemy, a major assault, grummage in the first degree. His music room attack was undetected, the weapon was untraceable, and the result, unbelievably messy. The only flaw was that Jack would not be able to watch his dad's face when he saw that desk. If I could only be there, he thought. I could point at that desk and say, "Okay, Janitor John. Janitor this." Or maybe I'd say, "Go ahead, work your magic. Tidy guy, you decided to go and become Mr. Clean, so here's a little present from your number one fan." Jack grinned, savoring the imagined moment. "Well, Jack, what is it?" "Uh-oh, battle stations!" It was Mrs. Carroll, in a lime green pantsuit bearing down from the front left flank. Artillery fire had already begun. Jack straightened up in his chair, frantically scrolling through that tiny part in his brain that had been tracking the teacher, trying to recall the last 2 or 3 droning sentences. Something about parts of speech, something about in, and a flash he knew, like instant replay in his head. With the sweetest smile he could manage, he'd say, "It's a preposition, right?" Mrs. Carroll glared at him and edged a little bit closer. She'd been watching him from the corner of her eye in the past 30 seconds, and she could have sworn that Jack Rankin was completely zoned out. Daydreaming was her pet peeve, and this was the 5th time she'd tried and failed to catch Jack at it. Pursing her lips, she said, "Yes, the word across is a preposition." Her eyes narrowed, and she'd edged a half a step nearer. Mrs. Carroll reminded Jack of a green lizard getting ready to flip its tongue out and snap a fly. She said, "Now, use it in a sentence." The sentence that popped into Jack's head was, "The English teacher darted across the ceiling like a chameleon." But what he said was, "The fisherman paddled his canoe across the lake." Lizard Woman glared back at Jack in an extra second or two. She'd wanted to be sure that she got the message that he'd almost been a very dead fly. "Yes," she said. "That's fine." Whirling away in an instant, she settled on a new victim. "Jessie, in the sentence that Jack just made up, what word is the object of the preposition?" Surviving a direct hit from the reptile patrol was a little scary, so Jack assigned another 10th of his mind to the unpleasant job of watching out for Mrs. Carroll. Glancing at the clock, Jack saw that he had another 30 minutes of 8th period to go. With an inward smile, he went back to his own thoughts, replaying his own secret victory again and again, and Jack especially enjoying the thought, thinking about the desk where the sweet, sticky time bomb in the back row of the music room. Chapter 5. School Justice. Mr. Pike reported the ruined desk to the office over the music room intercom at the start of 8th period. Mr. Ackerby dropped by, and what he was doing was hurried upstairs to take a look. He liked detective work, especially when the trail was fresh. The vice principal was on the case. Looking at the desk with Mr. Pike, Mr. Ackerby shook his head. Then, just to be polite, he asked, "So, Dave, you got any suspects for me?" Mr. Pike seemed like he was always in his own wacky little music zone, so Mr. Ackerby didn't expect him to be much help. "Absolutely," said Mr. Pike. "Got it all figured out." Mr. Ackerby's eyebrows didn't understand that a good choral director notices everything. Mr. Pike nodded and said, "Clear as a bell. I've got 56 kids in the 7th period class and 3 of them on absence list today, so 53 were here. I make all the kids fill the room front to back, and there was 51 chairs in the first 4 rows. I always look up to see who's late and when the bell rings, and today Carrie Lubis and Jack Rankin were almost tardy. They had to be the only kids sitting in the last row today. I wouldn't think either of them would do this, but they were back there. I'm sure of it. As he returned to the office, Mr. Ackerby revised his opinion of Mr. Pike, then looked at the class schedules for Loomis, Carey, Rankin, Jack. 5 minutes later, Mr. Ackerby had a quick conversation with the Loomis girl in the hallway outside her social studies class. Mr. Ackerby could tell she was innocent, so it had to be that Rankin boy. Someone was about to learn there is no such thing as the perfect crime, especially at school. And he was going to learn it the hard way. About 20 minutes into 8th period, Mr. Ackerby appeared at the doorway of Jack's English class. He said, "Excuse me, Mrs. Carroll, I need to have a word with Jack Rankin." Jack knew. He knew why Mr. Ackerby wanted to talk to him. As if in a fog, Jack got up from his desk and walked through the silent room, his face chalky white, and his mouth was dry. One look at Mr. Ackerby, he was sure he had his man. Mr. Ackerby closed the door to the classroom and glared down into Jack's pale face. Jack couldn't look him in the eye. Without raising his voice, Mr. Ackerby said, "Jack, I'd like you to walk down to the music room and bring a folding desk back to my office for me." Jack gulped. Weakly, lamely, hopelessly, he asked, "Which desk?" Mr. Ackerby's eyes flashed and he said, "Hold out your hands." Jack raised his hands up about to his waist. Mr. Ackerby said, "Higher, palms up," leaning in forward. Mr. Ackerby sniffed, and left hand, then the right one. "Watermelon." Pointing at Jack's right hand, he said, "Bring me that desk that smells just like that." It was a long way to the music room, and Jack was tempted to dash down the stairway, out the door, and just kept running and running. But he knew he couldn't. Mr. Pike was rehearsing with the 7th grade chorus. He looked up from his music stand when Jack came in. He shook his head, gave Jack a frown, but didn't miss a beat. Jack grabbed the desk and made his way awkwardly back out the door. As he walked to the office, Jack's mind filled with images of horrors to come. By the time he arrived at Mr. Ackerby's doorway, the desk seemed to weigh about 300 pounds. Mr. Ackerby was sitting in the bookcase by the window in his office, just waiting. Pointing with his stubby index finger, he showed where he wanted the desk and motioned Jack into that chair. Then he walked over and tipped the folding desk onto its side so they could both get a good look at the incredible mess in the bottom. The office filled with the heavy scent of gum. Mr. Ackerby shook his head. "Look at that. Unbelievable. What in the world could you have been thinking? Tell me, Jack, what were you thinking?" Mr. Ackerby had not had the time to read Jack's school record, so he didn't know that Jack was a pretty good student and never really had been in any real trouble at the elementary school. At this moment, all Mr. Ackerby knew was that this kid in blue jeans and a black t-shirt had worked pretty hard to destroy that desk. And whenever he caught someone damaging property, Mr. Ackerby didn't have to pretend to be angry. It was the real thing. Jack looked steadily at the man's brown necktie and tried not to flinch. Jack could smell the man's shampoo, his shaving cream, his aftershave lotion, and the ham and mustard sandwich he'd eaten for lunch and the mint he was sucking on. Remember, he's got a really good sniffer. He could smell that burger and fries cooking about 7 blocks away because of the vomit. Jack was angry at his dad, and he knew he was angry at himself now. And he hated the way things were spinning out of control. He clenched his jaw and worked really hard to keep his eyes from filling with tears. Jack had been asked a question, and Mr. Ackerby didn't like waiting. He leaned forward and spoke even louder. "I demand an answer. Look at this mess. What were you thinking?" Jack glanced at the desk, then to Mr. Ackerby's squinty eyes, and then back to his ugly necktie. Jack couldn't quite explain that question to himself, at least not clearly, and there was no way he was going to open up and try to explain all of his feelings to this guy. So Jack just said the normal thing. "I don't know. I just did it." As if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mr. Ackerby bent his face down close to Jack's and repeated, "You just did it? Well, you know what, buddy boy? You're just gonna undid it." He turned on his heel and after a couple of quick steps sat down at his desk with a thump. Mr. Ackerby grabbed a pen and began writing a note on a stationery pad. He finished it, ripped it off, and sealed it in an envelope, and began writing again. He said, "I'm sending a note home to your parents, and I'll be putting a memo in your permanent file. And starting today, you can cancel all of your after-school plans." Mr. Ackerby ripped the second piece of paper off the notepad, sealed it in another envelope, then stood up and walked over to Jack, handing him the first envelope, and he said, "This is for you to take home to your parents. This is for you to take home to your parents, get it signed, and bring it back." 2 envelopes, one to sign, one to bring back. Turning around, he nudged the desk with his toe of his brown shoe. "You take this ruined desk down to the janitor's workshop in the basement by the boys' gym. Then get back to your class." Mr. Ackerby paused and handed Jack the second envelope. "Immediately after school, you go back to the workshop, you hand this envelope to the chief custodian, and you tell him that you volunteered for after-school gum patrol, an hour a day for the next 3 weeks. Now get going." School justice, exactly the way Mr. Ackerby liked it, swift and certain. As Jack lugged the smelly desk through the empty hallways and down the stairs into the workshop, he was praying no one would be there, and no one was. He set the desk in the middle of the room and ran back up the stairs. He got to his English class just as the bell was ringing. He copied the assignment off the board, picked up his books, and went to social studies. All during 9th period, Jack fretted and worried. He wondered how much his dad would yell at him. He wondered if his mom would ground him. He wondered if something like this in his file would keep him from playing football when he got to high school. And he wondered if Mr. Ackerby had any idea that the chief custodian was his dad. Jack felt stupid for getting caught, and even worse, now he'd have to be the junior janitor for 3 whole weeks. There was no way out. If anyone in the school hadn't figured out that John the janitor was his dad, they wouldn't be left out of that secret for much longer. And of course, there only was one person to blame for this whole mess. Jack clenched his teeth and pressed his lips together, barely containing the urge to spit. And he thought, "Thanks again, Dad." Chapter 6. Reporting for duty. People said that Jack looked like his dad, and he hated it. They said it often enough that Jack guessed it was true. Sure, he could see that they both had straight brown hair, parted near the middle, and the same thick eyebrows that almost touched above the same deep-set brown eyes. But Jack was a little taller and about half the other 5th grades in the class. He guessed that he was on track to end up about the same height as his dad, just under 6 foot tall. And he already had the same strong arms and broad shoulders. Even Jack's real name was the same, John Philip Rankin, Jr. But the likeliness went deeper than that, deeper than Jack even liked to admit. It was more than the lines cut by a strong chin or a straight nose, more than a certain smile or a walking pattern, or even a pattern of speech. Like his dad, Jack was mostly quiet and thoughtful. He was happy to be on his own, but he also couldn't be friendly and quick to smile. He wasn't shy, but when he spoke carefully. There was a steadiness about Jack most of the time, unless you got on his bad side. Jack didn't get mad easily, and neither did his dad. But when either of them did get mad, look out. As Jack went to find his dad after school, he was ready for the worst. Jack stopped on the metal stairs leading down to the shop. The shop was next to the boiler room, so it was always cozy down there during the cold months. The main boiler was running now, and the roar of the burner made the stairs tremble beneath Jack's feet. The air coming up past him was loaded with different smells, workshop smells. The air was warm, but didn't seem cozy, at least not today. Jack set his face into a hard, who cares sort of look. He took a deep breath, started down the stairs. Halfway down, Jack let out a sigh of relief. The place was empty. The folding desk was still sitting in the middle of the gray concrete floor, right where he'd left it earlier that day. The dim afternoon sun shined from the window, well onto the far wall, made the small patch of light on the floor. The only other light that came up from the lamp was on his dad's desk. Mr. Ackerby had told him to go to the shop after school, and here he was, Jack's thought. It's not my fault if Mr. Big Shot Janitor is busy somewhere else. So Jack crossed the workshop to his dad's desk and sat down. Jack tipped the back in the old swivel chair and slowly spun it around. It's kind of fun to do anyways. Why not? As he did look up, the bookshelves mounted on the wall behind the desk. He didn't remember seeing them before. A row of binders on the top shelf kind of caught his eye. Each notebook was carefully labeled. Plumbing log, roofing schedule, groundskeeping, boiler maintenance, supplies and equipment, purchasing, alarm and bell systems, fire control systems, electrical system. There were more than a dozen binders up there. The lower shelf was jammed fat with catalogs from suppliers, some of them twice as thick as the Yellow Pages. And just so you know, Yellow Pages got replaced by Google. Used to be a big thick book. We had to look up phone numbers. If you wanted a phone number, you had to flip through the pages and find it and go, that's the one. Yeah, I'm that old too. One catalog was labeled Lewis Brothers Power Equipment. Jack loved tools, and he was good at making things and fixing things. His dad got him his own toolbox for Christmas when he was 7, and he'd been gradually filling it with tools. Real ones, not the plastic kid ones. Jack stood up to reach for the tool catalog when suddenly the room filled with a fluorescent light. A booming voice said, "You looking for something?" Jack turned around, startled, and the man halfway down the stairs saw his face. He grinned and said, "Hey, it's Jackie Boy. Look at the size of you. You must have picked up 2 inches since July. No wonder they sent you over to high school this year." Jack smiled and said, "Hi, Lou. I gotta talk to my dad." Lou chuckled as he came to rest down the hallway, or rest of the way down to the shop. "Thought maybe you were some kid looking here to check out, the books out of your dad's library." Lou Carswell was a tall, slender man with short cropped hair and stooped shoulders. He and his wife had come to Jack's house for Sunday supper and summer barbecues and plenty of times. Lou had been working at the high school almost as long as John Rankin has. There was a poorly focused photo of his dad's on his dad's dresser. 4 young guys in army uniforms. Jack knew one of them was his dad, and he was pretty sure that one of them was Lou. He'd never asked, but that's how it looked. Lou said, "Excuse me, I need to get a drink." That's better. Lou said, "If you're waiting for your dad, you got a long stretch ahead of you. He's up on 3 West in the science lab, fixing a motor in the ventilator. You best walk up there and find him." Jack said, "No, it's okay, I'll wait." Lou shook his head and motioned toward the stairs with his thumb. "I'm not kidding. Jackie's probably got another 40 minutes of work on that unit. So just pick it up and get up to that room 336 right now. Go on. He'll be glad to see you." With the note from Mr. Ackerby weighing him down, Jack started the long hike to the 3rd floor, palms sweating, mouth dry. He trudged up the stairs like a convict heading from the gallows. Jack could have found his way just by following his nose. He'd noticed a strange electrical smell all over the school right after lunch. As he approached room 336, the sharp odor of burned wiring got stronger and stronger. Peeking in the doorway, Jack saw his dad bent over the ventilator by the windows, his left arm completely inside the casing. He was reaching for something. Vent covers and spools of wire nuts, bolts, pliers, wrenches, even some wire clippers were spread out all over the floor and the nearest lab tables. Taking a deep breath, Jack walked in and said, "Hi, Dad." John Rankin turned his head. He smiled and said, "Hey, this is a good surprise. Good timing, too." He straightened up and pulled a flashlight from his back pocket. "I dropped a nut down behind the new motor assembly, and I can't get it with my hand in there to pick it up. Thought I was going to have to go all the way down to the shop and get a magnet. Here, I'm going to shine the light down from over this side, and you can see if you can get your hand to fit behind there and get it." Jack thought, what makes him think that I would want to get all covered with grease and dirt like he is? But Jack took a look down into the register and leaned all the way over, threaded his hand down, and came back out with a nut. "Here you go." "Great. Oh, that's going to save me some time. John Rankin straightened up and smiled at his son, tossed him a rag to wipe off his hand. Looking into Jack's face for the first time, he saw right away that this really wasn't going to be a social visit. In a quieter voice, he said, "What's on your mind, Jack?" Jack looked at the floor and said, I got myself into trouble, Dad." Handed his father the note from Mr. Ackerby. John pulled a chair out from under the lab table and sat down. He took out his reading glasses from his shirt pocket and perched them on the end of his nose. Then he tore open the envelope, unfolded the paper, and started to read. 2 lines in, and he looked up sharply at Jack. "You're the one who messed up the desk? That's the one that's down in the shop, right?" Jack felt his face redden, but he met his father's eyes with a sudden, sullen look, and he nodded. His dad looked back at the note, and it only took another 10 seconds for him to finish it. He put the paper back in the envelope and laid it back on the scarred black lab table. He took off his glasses and tucked them back into his pocket. Then he turned his head and looked out the window. A brisk wind was pushing up the fallen leaves into heaps along the fence along the football field. John Rankin cleared his throat. "It's hard to know what to make of this, son." There was a long pause, as if he hoped Jack would offer some kind of explanation. Jack kept silent. Then John said, "But I guess there's time." He tapped the envelope on the lab table. "According to this, seems like we've got 3 weeks to get to the bottom of it." John stood up and walked over to the ventilator. He looked in his toolbox and picked up a wrench, squinted at it, read the size, and turned back to Jack, both arms down inside the cabinet again. He said, "You know that door to the right of my desk in the shop?" Jack said, "Sure." He thought, "What does he think I am, a dummy?" His dad continued, "Go inside and look on the shelves to the left. There's a special can of solvent called Offit, Offit. It's pretty good with fresh stuff. And you'll need a roll of paper towels, and some rubber gloves, and a stiff-bladed putty knife. It's going to help you with the hardened gum. Toss your supplies in a plastic bucket, carry them around. Easier that way. And you'll need a trash bag. The buckets and the trash bags are behind the door on the right. After that folding desk is clean, in the back of the music room, and then back in the music room, you can move on to the tables and the chairs in the library. I'll be checking your work. And I've got a feeling that Mr. Ackerby will be too." John turned around and tossed the wrench and back into the toolbox. The metallic clatter made Jack jump. His dad said, "Any questions?" "No." "Then get to it." John Rankin turned back to the broken ventilator, and Jack turned and headed back down into the workshop for the 3rd time today. Jack felt so relieved. He practically skipped down the empty stairway. His dad hadn't even yelled at him. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was a good omen. Maybe his mom wouldn't ground him. And maybe Ackerby would lighten up and let him off the hook after a week or so. Who could say? Maybe Gum Patrol wasn't going to be so bad after all. Then Jack got caught up himself. Excuse me, let me try that again. Then Jack caught himself. "What am I, nuts? Gum Patrol? Not so bad." Yeah, right. Chapter 7. Cruising along in this book. Yes. It's Gum Patrol. Jack got to the shop and gathered his supplies. The folding desk was waiting for him. Jack turned the desk upside down, got onto the workshop onto the floor, bent over and took a careful look, poking here and there with his finger. His research had been right on target. Fresh watermelon bubblicious was very sticky and very disgusting. Jack stood up, clenched his jaw, and gave the desk a swift kick. This was supposed to be his dad's job. Still, Jack was smart enough to appreciate the irony of getting stuck in his own trap. Little gum joke. So he heaved a big sigh, turned the underside of the desk toward the light, and went to work. Jack launched his attack with the putty knife. Big mistake. The gum was too fresh. It smeared all around, covering more of the surface. It took him 5 minutes to clean the blade of the putty knife. And when he was done, he had to shake it off his hand until the tool clattered on the floor. I've done that before. Its black plastic handle full or fouled with crimson. It means it was all covered in that sticky, gross red. Blech. Watermelon gum. Who knew? Then Jack crumpled up a paper towel and tried rubbing. The paper ripped to shreds. It added a layer of sticky white fiber on the goo, like grass clippings blown onto the fresh tar road. Finally, he tried putting 2 layers of paper towel around the end of the putty knife, pushing with the covered end of the blade. He was able to plow a ridge of gum. Then he could close the paper towel around the gob and pull it off. The threads created off by pulling off wads of gum fell onto the workshop floor. The mess kept spreading to a wider and wider area. Gob after strand after wad, Jack scraped and pulled and rubbed until, 20 minutes later, only a massive smear was left. Time for the solvent. Jack read the directions on the can, then poured some off it onto a folded paper towel and started to rub. The gum dissolved as if by magic, staining the paper towel with crimson, leaving behind a clean surface. Inch by inch, Jack rubbed and rubbed until the job was done. The desk was no longer sticky, gooey, or smelly. But Jack, that was a whole other story. There was gum on the front and the back of both of his hands, and bits of paper towel was stuck between his fingers. There were thin strands of gum crisscrossing his shoelaces and shoes. Both knees of his jeans had crimson spots, and there was a glob the size of a pea stuck in the hair of his left eyebrow. Carefully reading the off-it label again, Jack made sure it was safe to use a solvent on himself. In another few minutes, he'd gotten most of the gum off of his hands and shoes and pants. The can said to keep the liquid away from your eyes, so Jack just picked it, pulled the gum off his eyebrow until he got most of it out. It still felt funny, but at least when he looked at his face in the mirror over the utility sink, he could see only a small trace of crimson. It's good enough for now. Jack stuffed the sticky paper towel into the trash barrel by the stairs. Then he took a clean desk back to the music room and had to find Lou to have him open the door. On the way back, he stopped at his locker to get his backpack and coat, and finally ran back to the workshop to put the equipment away. It was 3:25, and today's hour of gum patrol was officially over. Jack ran up the workshop stairs, streaked down the hallway toward the back door, and just barely got onto the last late bus. Dropping onto his squeaky seat, the bus lurched out of the parking lot, and Jack was panting. But he was relieved. If he had missed the bus, he would have caused other problems. He would have to hang out for at least another hour and ride home with his dad, something he didn't want to do. Not ever, especially not today. If he had ridden home with his dad, then the other note from Mr. Ackerby would have been delivered to both of his parents at once. And Jack was pretty sure things would go better if his mom read the note first, all by herself. At least, that's what he hoped. I think Jack has got a little bit of a taste of his own medicine, don't you think? So that was chapters 4 through 7. We start chapter 8, Hung Jury. We'll do that next time. Hope you guys are enjoying this book. If you're not, well, buckle up. We're about 42 pages in, so we're about a third of the way through the book. So that's kind of cool. Just curious. Do you see why we have a gum rule at school? It's gross. And I don't want to be the one picking it up. So next time you have gum in the classroom, no. Someone's got to clean it up. We'll see you guys next time. I'm stopping the video.